Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And if you're watching on Spotify or YouTube, make sure that you interact with the video in any capacity that you would like. We are continuing the Layoff series today or this week, and I just want to remind you that last week we covered the technical side of layoffs with Jenna Dune, and she really helped us, I think, to better understand just generally like what to think about when it comes to layoffs. And we're going to talk a little bit about layoffs further in this episode, specifically around what it is to support or how we can support those who have quote unquote survived the layoff process, how to manage the process. We're also going to talk about, like the impact that layoffs have on HR professionals. And so we talked a little bit about some of that with Jenna, but we're going to go take a deeper dive, let's say, in this week's episode. And so really today's focus is about taking care of ourselves while supporting others. And really this is like probably something that you've heard before, but we can't pour from an empty cup. We can't be 100% there for someone else if we're not 100% there for ourselves. Like we have to be feeling our best in order to help others. Actually, this just came up in a class that I take my daughters to, and I was talking to another mom and I said, you can't be there for your child if you are not there for yourself first. And I really think it's true. And so let's start off with self-care for HR professionals. First of all, layoffs, I think I've probably talked about this before, but layoffs take a huge toll on us as HR professionals because ultimately we are human too. We carry other people's grief. So if someone's really, really upset or really affected, obviously everyone's affected by a layoff. But if someone is like very deeply emotionally affected by a decision a company's made, that affects us. And of course, I think we all have been through an experience where we've had to lay off employees that we didn't want to see go because not everything is 100% in our control. And it just can be very difficult. And especially if you think about like a mass layoff, you could be having multiple conversations that are really difficult in one day. And it's just a lot. And so sometimes we do have to pull ourselves out and think about how we are taking care of ourselves in the midst of all of that. There are some things that you should be aware of in the event that you are struggling with I don't want to say consequences, but I guess let's say it, the consequences of these layoff actions. And some things like that might look like emotional exhaustion, sleep issues, or having trouble sleeping or falling asleep, feeling like you're numb or totally like apathetic to certain situations, and even irritability with people who are closest to you, whether that's family, friends, or colleagues. And when we think about this numbness to situations, I've heard a lot of HR people say, oh, I'm just numb to this at this point, or I'm just numb to that. That numbness is not really the place that we want to go to, because when we feel numb to certain things, we potentially lose our humanity, or we lose the humanization of the person on the other end of that conversation. So if you do at any point hear yourself talking about how you're numb to something, or that you have a numbness in a particular situation, address that within yourself. Maybe talk to someone who could understand what you're going through, especially another HR person, because that's something that you definitely want to prevent and change, not suppress. We don't want to suppress anything, I suppose, but you definitely don't want to feel that way. And sometimes you might just need to make a career change if you're feeling numb. It's just not really what makes for the best circumstances for an employee who's relying on you potentially. And some things that I'd love to share with you that can help you to alleviate some of the stress related to actioning layoffs or difficult decisions. And that's scheduling breaks between tough meetings. So if you're laying off a few people at a time, then maybe scheduling breaks in between those times or whenever you can, creating an end of day shutdown ritual. So if you have been here for a while, you know that when I first went remote, I would talk about, I think this must have been like in the first 50 episodes or so, but I would talk about how I would turn off like my lamp in my office because it signaled to me that I was done for the workday. And this was at a time when I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment. So it was very important that I had those rituals and separations, because when you don't create that separation or something that is demarcating your end of day, it's very easy for those things to spill into the other parts of your life. And so if you don't create those boundaries, then it's very difficult to maneuver, I think. Finding HR peer support, whether it's in a support group that might exist, or I should say communities. Like, for example, Hacking HR is a wonderful community. We had Enrique on for a few episodes ago, and he is someone that I would say leads a really strong community of HR leaders. So that's a great way to A, like voice some of the things that you might be experiencing, and B, feel like you're not alone in this, and that you have a support or a support group, or like a network of people who really get what you're experiencing. If it's becoming something like really stressful for you, or you're really struggling, then certainly I would recommend finding outside support, like a therapist or a counselor. It's not lost on me that a lot of the work that many of us do, especially depending on your industry, can be really intense. And so if you need outside support, that's definitely something I would encourage. And then, of course, and finally, it's kind of like what I said before, creating boundaries between your work life and your home life. Of course, I know in some ways it's easier said than done. As I mentioned, I used to live in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city, and so I had to use my lamp as a way to denote when I was not working, just by turning off the light. And it worked for me, but it can be really difficult to create those boundaries and feel this sense of difference, especially when you work remotely. I was actually just talking to someone about my own experience now working remotely as a mother too, and feeling like I'm in some ways not as focused as I used to be, because I can hear and sense and feel everything else that's going on around me, and how it can be just really difficult to work from home. And the other thing that came up is that I was like, I just feel like I'm getting up, I'm throwing on like leggings and a t-shirt, which is totally fine, by the way. And I'm not really like taking as much pride in my presentation as I used to. And even though like that's totally my own thing, and it's not necessarily true, like I'm working out and I eat well and like I do all of that stuff, so obviously I take pride in my appearance, but I share this because I was like, you know what, maybe I need to like I used to work in retail and fashion. I used to like, feel really stylish and very just like put together. And then now working from home and being a mom, it's like all about convenience and comfort. And although like that's also fine, I said to this person, like, maybe I need to just like wake up a little bit earlier, do my hair and makeup like I used to do, and like feel as best as possible, so that it doesn't feel like I have these like blurred lines throughout my life. And actually, I think it might be working. Like, I even did my makeup today. And so if you're watching this, you might be like, oh, Traci like actually looks a little bit different. If you noticed, thank you. If you didn't, then that just means that I'm like every other person and I'm totally overanalyzing my own existence. So that's okay. But I share this openly because I think it's very hard to be 100% for every other person without sacrificing a little bit of yourself. And so when you can realize, like, as an HR professional, as a person, as a mother, as a father, as an individual, whatever you are, however you describe yourself, that there is a part of you that has to put yourself first too. And you have to put yourself first, probably first, in order to be all of those things for everyone else. then you're actually going to make it so much further. And so I will be the first test of this. Hopefully in all of my podcast recordings, I look more like and feel more like myself. Because frankly, it's also been really hard to record and find the energy and the excitement for my podcast, which is so weird because I love my podcast and I love all of you and I love making this content. But, ultimately when we have a lot going on or when we're dealing with a lot of difficult things, like for someone who's dealing with a lot of layoff conversations, for example, it can just be really difficult. So be human, humanize yourself, bring the human back to human resources, if I may, and do things that enable and empower you to feel your best so that you can perform your best in and outside of work. So when we think about managing the process to layoffs, there's so much to prepare. And I kind of talked about this in the episode with Jenna last week. And if you didn't listen to that episode, I strongly encourage that you do. You don't have to listen to this layoff series in any particular order, but I do think it's helpful to hear her perspective, because there is so much that we can do to humanize this process and make the process as effective and clear as possible for people who are unfortunately on the receiving end of a layoff. So before any announcement or any communication is transmitted, there has to be some preparation, mental and physical, because if there isn't that preparation, that's when everything goes to crap. Obviously, we've seen companies who have failed to prepare. And they're also, we have to think about what that person is going to be experiencing or what those people are going to be experiencing. We should be thinking about what they might need, what support they might need, and ensuring that they're being told in a private space. I can't imagine anything worse than delivering a layoff conversation or laying someone off, let's call it what it is, in a space that doesn't allow for reactions or emotions. Like that probably sucks. So definitely making sure that there is some privacy, especially if you're in person, you have a ton of control over that. If you're remote, it is a little bit harder, but do your best. And when you are ultimately in that conversation moment, stay composed and human, right? Like this is the whole, again, if you will, bring the human back to human resources. Don't be a robot. Be prepared, but have a human approach to the person that you're speaking with. It's hard to do, to be composed and have empathy, but you have to find that balance. Sometimes it's in our facial expressions. Sometimes it's in our tone. Sometimes it's all of those things combined. But you really have to put that best foot forward to be as human as possible and to really, really focus on empathy and understanding. Allow for the silence in the conversation, whether it's silence on your end or silence for reflection from the person being told. And certainly if you're in person, expect big emotions and big reactions. And I think I say that in person because I've unfortunately had to lay off people in person and remotely. And I think when remote, people tend to turn off their camera, or they just kind of hold it together a little bit differently. Whereas in person, the emotions are felt a little bit more openly, I think, because they don't have that space on their own or alone to feel what they might want to feel. And again, have resources ready. So we learned from Jenna that there are all of these offboarding and outplacement resources that can be provided to employees who are being laid off. And that I think is a wonderful thing to consider offering to employees that you may need to one day have this type of conversation with. When we think about the follow-up to those conversations for you, it's a good idea to take a moment to just kind of pause, take a deep breath, go for a walk, whatever it is that you might be feeling. Maybe you need to debrief with a trusted colleague or a colleague who might have been sitting in on that conversation with you. It's just a lot when you know that you're terminating someone's employment and they don't have a job anymore. Like, that's heavy stuff. This is why I say, if you feel numb to that, you either have to leave the profession and find a different career, or you need to deal with that, because nobody wants to talk to a robot or be told by a robot that they're being laid off. Like, the human element is really, really important, and it just totally sucks. So it is okay if you need to feel your feelings. And then also, in terms of that process, following that communication, things should be delivered in writing, whether it's a severance or a separation agreement or a termination letter. There's something that ultimately will follow those sessions. So again, being prepared, being as prepared as possible, partnering with other members of the HR team, partnering with legal, partnering with finance, whoever you need to collaborate with. That's something that you want to be prepared to do ahead of and prepared with ahead of those meetings where you are ultimately having these conversations. And, Jenna brought up a great point last week, which was that there is sometimes survivor's guilt from those who are remaining with a company after a number of colleagues have been let go. And some of those common reactions, other than survivor's guilt, are fear that they're next, anger and grief for the colleagues who have been laid off, a drop in productivity. Totally, totally normal. People are distracted, they're upset, they're annoyed, they're afraid. Productivity is just not the number one thing that's going on. And then sometimes we also see people overwork because they want to prove that they're worth keeping, because again, this fear comes up that they might be next. So being very, very cognizant of those common reactions and being open to having to work with someone, or even talking really to be open and talk to those particular people who might be displaying some of these things. I think that's really important. I can tell you in my career and experience, I have recognized things like this from people, and I will say, hey, are you feeling okay since this layoff? I recognize like this was a really difficult circumstance. Do you want to talk about it? And I think that being open and transparent that, hey, this did just happen. It sucks. You might be feeling a particular way about it. Let's talk about it. I think it allows for someone to just feel what they're feeling and to have a safe space to talk about it. There also has to be a communication strategy here. The leadership team, whether you are on the leadership team or you are able to influence the leadership team, there has to be communication to the rest of the organization. There should be regular and transparent and, of course, honest updates where necessary. When it comes to the communication following a layoff, there should absolutely be a very clear plan for what comes next. There should be a direct addressing of fear, as I just mentioned, like speaking very directly about what people might be feeling can be extremely helpful. And when there's good news, share it. Like first of all, that's true any time of the year, but especially when there has been a recent layoff, sharing good news as often as possible is a good idea to keep morale high. And speaking of morale, there might be a rebuilding of morale actually. And so for you as an HR professional, having small group check-ins, programs that recognize efforts from teams or individuals, even team building events or events that get team members connected, whether to people they know already or to others, all of those things have a huge impact on rebuilding the morale that understandably takes a hit when there's a layoff process. And then, of course, future growth plans and mental health resources and things like that do also play a role in rebuilding morale, because people need to feel connected, they need to feel a sense of purpose, and they need to see that there is a bright future ahead for them, because in most cases there is. Like, those who are not affected by a layoff process are not affected for particular reasons, whether it's their performance or whether it's their tenure or their role on a team. So they need to feel really purposeful within an organization, and they have to see that bright light there and the light at the end of that tunnel. So to kind of close us out this week, just remember that these things are temporary. Like, the impact that is on the HR professional when in layoff conversations hopefully that's temporary if you are doing things routinely that enable you to be your best self. And if you're doing things in those moments to really like decompress from a difficult situation. Remember, we are all human and we're all humans first. And so that means you have to approach things from a human perspective, and you need to also remember that you are human. And so you have to take care of yourself and really make sure that you're at 100%. Remember, you can't fill or pour into someone else's cup with an empty cup yourself. So you have to really be able to be at 100% yourself before you can help someone else. So with all of those reminders, next week we're going to have another series another episode, I should say, for the Layoff series. So please make sure that you are subscribed so that you can get reminders and notifications when the next episode drops on Tuesday. And I would say take this week, depending on when you're listening, between this episode and next episode to create a self-care plan. Maybe you're going to do what I do and you're going to turn off the lights where you work to denote that you are done with work. Maybe you're going to shut your laptop. Maybe you're going to take a walk after work so that you take a moment to decompress before you go into your like quote unquote home life, right? Create that self-care plan so that you're doing things that give back to you so that you can be at 100% yourself. And again, next week, we're going to continue with the Layoff series. And then the episode after that, I'm going to have a very, very, very interesting guest on to close out the Layoff series. Someone actually that doesn't totally believe in HR's function. And I'm actually really excited to have someone who really challenges us on the podcast. So again, make sure you're subscribed. If you like this Layoff series, let me know. You can always email me at contact@hrtraci.com. You can go to my website, hrtraci.com, and submit a form and let us know some feedback. And of course, you can contact me on Instagram too at hrtraci. My DMs are always open. So thank you again for tuning in to the Layoff series episode, and I will see you next week. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.